June 6, 1944, 6:30 a.m., Omaha Beach, Normandy. The ramp dropped with a metallic clang, and 36 men from the 1st Infantry Division surged forward into waist-deep water and a wall of German machine gun fire. Behind them, the flat-bottomed wooden boat that had carried them through 5 miles of rough seas was already reversing, its protected propeller churning white water as it backed away to retrieve another load of soldiers. The boat was 36 feet long, constructed of plywood over an oak frame, powered by a 225-horsepower diesel engine. It had no sophisticated armor, no advanced weapons systems, and cost less than $10,000 to build. Yet this simple wooden craft, officially designated Landing Craft, Vehicle, Personnel, or LCVP, would deliver more American fighting men onto hostile shores than any other vehicle in military history. The Navy's Bureau of Ships had rejected it repeatedly. Their experts declared it unseaworthy, poorly designed, and fundamentally unsuitable for military use. Meanwhile, a loud-mouthed boatbuilder from New Orleans, a man with an 8th-grade education who'd taught himself naval architecture through correspondence courses, kept insisting he'd already solved the problem they were failing to fix. His name was Andrew Jackson Higgins, and the Navy's admirals despised him. He cursed in meetings with senior officers, accused the Bureau of corruption and incompetence, built boats without waiting for approval, then dared the Navy to prove they didn't work. But his boats worked when Navy-approved designs failed. And when the time came to invade Nazi-occupied Europe, it wasn't the Bureau's carefully engineered designs that carried American soldiers to victory. It was the crazy invention of a boatbuilder who'd learned his trade hauling lumber through Louisiana swamps. General Dwight D. Eisenhower would later say that Higgins was the man who won the war for us. By war's end, Higgins Industries would produce over 20,000 boats, employing over 25,000 workers in integrated facilities years before the Civil Rights Movement. But the real story is how a stubborn outsider fought Navy bureaucracy for years to build the single most important invasion craft in military history, and how the worst defeats of the war resulted from using inferior landing craft, while the greatest victories depended on Higgins boats nobody wanted. Andrew Jackson. Higgins was born in 1886 in Nebraska, but by the 1920s he'd established himself in New Orleans as a specialty boat builder with a reputation for solving impossible problems. Louisiana's valuable timber grew in bayous and wetlands inaccessible to conventional boats. The water was too shallow for deep-draft vessels, and submerged obstacles destroyed propellers and tore hulls open. Higgins, with no formal training in naval architecture, decided he could design better boats. He enrolled in correspondence courses, studied Cajun boats that worked in shallow water, and began building. The breakthrough was a flat-bottomed design with a protected propeller tunnel. The propeller recessed into a semicircular tunnel carved into the hull's bottom. This protected the propeller from damage while allowing the boat to operate in as little as 18 inches of water and power over sandbars that would ground conventional craft. Naval architects said flat-bottomed boats would be unstable and unseaworthy. Higgins proved them wrong by taking his boats into conditions that conventional craft couldn't survive. His boats ran up onto sandbars, reversed off them, and handled rough water better than deeper draft vessels. Lumber companies, oil companies, and the Coast Guard began ordering them. Then, in 1938, the U.S. Marine Corps came looking for a boat that could carry troops from ships offshore, through surf and over obstacles, land them on beaches quickly, then retract and repeat. The Navy's Bureau of Ships had been working on the problem for years with limited success. Their designs were heavy, expensive, and prone to broaching, turning sideways in surf and capsizing. Higgins showed up uninvited with a boat he'd already built. It was 36 feet long, constructed primarily of plywood over oak framing, featured his protected propeller tunnel, and could beach itself, then back off without turning around. What it lacked was a bow ramp. Troops had to climb over the sides to disembark. In 1939, tests at Norfolk, Higgins's boats outperformed everything the Bureau submitted. They handled rough water, beached themselves reliably, and proved far more capable than Navy-approved designs. But the Bureau rejected Higgins's boats anyway, citing various deficiencies including the lack of a bow ramp. They awarded contracts to established shipyards instead. Higgins exploded. He accused the Bureau of corruption, claimed they were protecting contracts with established shipyards rather than selecting the best design, and made it clear he thought the admirals were incompetent. The Navy banned him from future competitions. The Bureau of Ships represented the naval establishment, career officers and civilian engineers with decades of relationships with major East Coast shipyards. Higgins was an outsider from Louisiana who built boats in a city with no naval shipbuilding tradition. His company was small, his methods were unorthodox, and his personality was abrasive. More significantly, accepting Higgins's boats meant admitting the Bureau had wasted years and substantial money developing inferior designs. It meant canceling contracts with politically connected shipyards and dealing with a contractor who'd already proven he wouldn't follow orders or show proper deference. But by 1941, the crisis was undeniable. The Marine Corps, impressed by Higgins' boats and frustrated by Bureau failures, began purchasing them through discretionary funds. Then Higgins saw photographs of Japanese landing craft with bow ramps and had his breakthrough. He designed a bow ramp and welded it onto his existing boat design. The ramp, constructed of quarter-inch steel plate, was hinged at the bottom and held up by cables. When the boat beached, releasing the cables dropped the ramp forward, creating a 5-foot-wide exit that troops could run down in seconds. Higgins retrofitted several boats, demonstrated the troops could disembark in under 30 seconds, and offered to build as many as needed at $10,000 each. The Marine Corps ordered 50 boats in June 1941, bypassing the Bureau entirely. Furious, the Bureau demanded official testing. In August 1941, the tests were brutal. Higgins' boats performed flawlessly in conditions that destroyed Bureau-approved craft. Even the Bureau couldn't ignore results this decisive. In September 1941, they issued Higgins a contract for 1,000 boats. 3 months later, Pearl Harbor was attacked. The United States was at war, and suddenly the military needed landing craft by the thousands. In January 1942, Higgins Industries employed 500 workers. By end of 1943, the company employed over 25,000 workers across 8 plants and was producing more landing craft than all other American manufacturers combined. Higgins accomplished this by treating boats like automobiles. While traditional shipyards built boats one at a time using skilled craftsmen, Higgins adopted assembly line production. He broke construction into sub-assemblies that could be built simultaneously by semi-skilled workers, then brought together for final assembly. This allowed him to train new workers in weeks rather than years. He used materials that didn't require special skills, marine plywood over wooden frames with minimal metal components. And he integrated his workforce years before civil rights legislation, employing African Americans and women alongside white men at equal pay. This wasn't idealism. Higgins needed workers and didn't care about race or gender if they could do the job. The production numbers were staggering. In 1942, Higgins delivered 2,472 boats. In 1943, 12,964 boats. At peak production in 1944, the company completed more than 700 boats per month, 1 boat every 90 minutes around the clock. The LCVP's design made it effective beyond simple transportation. The boat was 36 feet long with a 10-foot 10-inch beam. Empty weight was 18,000 pounds. Fully loaded with 36 troops or a vehicle, displacement reached 36,500 pounds. The 225-horsepower gray marine diesel provided cruise speeds of 9 knots and maximum speeds approaching 12 knots. The protected propeller tunnel allowed operation in 3 feet of water and protected the propeller from damage when grounding on beaches. The bow ramp dropped forward in seconds, creating a stable exit that troops could charge down at full speed. 2 .30-caliber machine guns provided suppressive fire during approaches. Steel armor plates protected troops from frontal fire, though the sides remained open. Additional armor would have reduced cargo capacity and made the boat slower. The result was a craft optimized for its mission. Get men from ships to beaches quickly, survive the approach through rough water and hostile fire, deploy troops in seconds, then extract and repeat. The LCVP wasn't designed for extended combat. It was a taxi that could navigate conditions no other craft could handle. June 6, 1944, began in darkness for men of the 1st and 29th Infantry Divisions preparing to assault Omaha Beach. They climbed down cargo nets into Higgins boats, rolling in 6-foot swells, most of them seasick and terrified. The 5-mile run to shore took over an hour through waves that broke over the bows and flooded the well areas despite frantic bailing. As dawn broke and boats approached shore, German defensive fire began. Artillery shells raised waterspouts among the craft. Machine gun fire punched through plywood hulls. Some boats took direct hits and disintegrated. Others kept coming despite damaged engines and flooding hulls. At 6:30 a.m., the first wave beached at Omaha and dropped their ramps. The troops charged into a killing zone. German machine guns from fortified positions on the bluffs caught Americans in interlocking fields of fire. Men fell on the ramps, on the beaches, in the water. Those who made it off the boats found themselves pinned down with no cover, while German fire poured from positions that should have been destroyed, but weren't. Omaha Beach became the costliest D-Day landing, approximately 2,400 American casualties. But the Higgins boats performed exactly as designed. They got troops through rough seas and German fire to the beaches. They survived groundings, near misses from artillery, and direct hits from machine guns. When boats were destroyed, neighboring craft picked up survivors and continued toward shore. Coxswains made multiple runs despite damage, casualties, and horror. At Utah Beach, where pre-invasion bombing had been more effective, the story was different. Higgins boats landed troops quickly, with minimal casualties. The protected propeller tunnels allowed boats to scrape over underwater obstacles, steel hedgehogs, wooden stakes, mines that would have disabled conventional craft. By nightfall, approximately 156,000 Allied troops were ashore in Normandy. Thousands of Higgins boats had made multiple trips, delivering not just troops but vehicles, ammunition, supplies, and reinforcements. The boats operated continuously despite casualties, damage, and exhausted crews. The D-Day landings, the largest amphibious invasion in history, succeeded because of brave troops, naval gunfire support, air superiority, and operational planning. But none of it would have been possible without landing craft capable of delivering men and material through rough seas and heavy fire. The simple wooden boats that Navy bureaucrats had rejected repeatedly proved to be the enabling technology that made D-Day possible. While Higgins boats were landing troops in Normandy, they were simultaneously supporting operations across the Pacific. The island-hopping campaign depended absolutely on landing craft capable of operating in conditions far more challenging than Europe. Coral reefs, unpredictable surf, volcanic sand beaches, and Japanese defenders who'd had years to prepare. From Guadalcanal in 1942 through Iwo Jima and Okinawa in 1945, Higgins boats participated in every major amphibious operation. At Iwo Jima, they landed 70,000 Marines on volcanic sand beaches under fire from positions carved into rock. At Okinawa, over 180,000 troops landed in the initial assault, with constant resupply by landing craft for over 80 days. The boat's performance demonstrated what Higgins had understood from the beginning. The best military equipment isn't the most sophisticated, but the most reliable. While complex equipment broke down in tropical conditions and salt spray, the simple LCVP kept working. The plywood hull could be patched in the field. The diesel engine could be maintained with basic training. The protected propeller meant boats could ground on coral without being disabled. By August 1945, when atomic bombs ended the war, Higgins boats had participated in every major amphibious operation in both theaters. They'd delivered over 1 million Allied soldiers directly onto hostile beaches and proven that Andrew Higgins's design was the enabling technology that made Allied victory possible. But when the war ended, Higgins Industries faced immediate crisis. The military canceled contracts and stopped ordering boats. The company that had been producing 700 boats monthly suddenly had no customers and enormous overhead. Higgins tried converting to peacetime production, motorboats, commercial vessels, experimental designs. But the transition proved difficult. His confrontational management style, effective during wartime when results mattered more than relationships, alienated peacetime customers. Labor unions organized his workforce and demanded wage increases. Higgins, who'd provided good wages during the war, resisted and faced strikes from workers he felt had betrayed him. Higgins Industries began losing money. The company sold facilities, laid off workers, and struggled to find markets. By the early 1950s, the empire that had employed 25,000 people had shrunk to a fraction of its wartime size. Andrew Higgins died on August 1, 1952, at age 65, essentially broke. The fortune he'd accumulated during the war had been consumed by failed peacetime ventures and legal battles. The man who'd built boats that won World War II died with little to show for his contributions beyond recognition from military leaders who understood what he'd accomplished. General Eisenhower's assessment was unequivocal. "Andrew Higgins is the man who won the war for us. If Higgins had not designed and built those LCVPs, we never could have landed over an open beach. The whole strategy of the war would have been different." Eisenhower understood what historians would later confirm. Allied strategy in World War II depended absolutely on the ability to conduct amphibious operations. Without effective landing craft, the Allies couldn't invade North Africa, Sicily, Italy, or France. They couldn't conduct the island-hopping campaign in the Pacific. The LCVP wasn't just a boat, it was an enabling technology that made Allied strategy viable. Over 23,000 landing craft of various types were built by Higgins Industries, including approximately 2,500 LCVPs. But the real story isn't about quantity, it's about effectiveness. The LCVP had a lower loss rate than competing designs, required less maintenance, could be operated by minimally trained crews, and cost only $10,000 per boat. The boat's influence endures in modern landing craft design. Bow ramps for rapid deployment, protected propellers for shallow draft operations, simple, rugged construction prioritizing reliability, these principles remain doctrine for amphibious assault vessels. More broadly, Higgins's story demonstrates that the best solutions often come from unexpected sources. A boat builder with an 8th-grade education solved problems that Navy engineers with advanced degrees couldn't crack. Bureaucratic resistance to new ideas blocked innovations that were more effective than approved alternatives. And sometimes the right person to solve a problem is the one willing to tell experts they're wrong and prove it by building something that works. Today, surviving Higgins boats are displayed in museums across America. The National WWII Museum in New Orleans features restored LCVPs and exhibits about the man who designed them. The museum's location is fitting. The city where Higgins Industries once dominated the waterfront now preserves the memory of the war those boats helped win. The tragedy is that Higgins died broke and largely forgotten outside military circles. The confrontational style that let him overcome bureaucratic resistance during wartime alienated peacetime customers. The demand for landing craft disappeared with the war's end. The Navy bureaucrats he'd fought outlasted him, but the boats endured. The LCVPs that stormed beaches across 2 theaters, that delivered over 1 million Allied soldiers onto hostile shores, proved that sometimes the crazy idea from the impossible personality is exactly what wins wars. Andrew Jackson Higgins built boats that won World War II. He fought bureaucrats, ignored regulations, employed workers others wouldn't hire, and behaved like every administrator's nightmare. But his wooden boats, built in New Orleans by an integrated workforce years ahead of its time, carried American soldiers to victory on beaches across the world. When the ramps dropped on D-Day and troops charged onto Omaha Beach, they were riding in boats that Navy bureaucrats had tried to prevent from being built. When Marines landed on Iwo Jima and Okinawa, they were delivered by craft that procurement officers had rejected as unsuitable. Andrew Higgins died in 1952, broke and largely forgotten. But his boats had already secured his legacy. He was the man who won the war for us. Sometimes the most important innovations come from the least expected sources. Sometimes bureaucrats are wrong and the loud-mouthed outsider is right. And sometimes winning wars requires not the most sophisticated weapons, but the simplest tools that actually work when lives depend on them. The Higgins boat proved all of this, and the beaches of Normandy, Sicily, Okinawa, and dozens of other landing sites prove it still.